Good afternoon from Strasbourg and welcome to the European Audiovisual Observatory webinar on Gatekeepers in the Digital Services Act package. What about VOD? This webinar is part of a series of regular appointments organized by the Observatory on a selection of topics related to the so-called DSA package, which is the regulation proposals that were tabled by the European Commission last December. My name is Maja Capello. I am the head of legal department at the Observatory, and I will be your moderator today. We have viewers not only from Europe, but just to mention a few, also from Latin America, Canada, North Africa, Central Asia, Russian, Japan. So hello and welcome to all different time zones. You are most welcome, all participants, to interact with us throughout the event. You will find the chat box and the Q&A box on the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. And please feel free to interact with us at any time, and we will bring it in at the right moment. Now, the European Commission has tabled a comprehensive regulatory package. It aims at modernizing the current legal framework that is applicable to digital services, including social media, online gatekeeper marketplaces, and other online platforms that operate in the European Union. And within this package, there is the Digital Markets Act, which regulates large online platforms acting as gatekeepers in digital markets. And it aims to make sure that these platforms behave in a fair way online. Now, looking at the audiovisual sector in Europe, as the Observatory had the opportunity to show on the occasion of a conference during the Cannes Film Market last year, the COVID-19 crisis has most likely amplified already existing trends in Europe. One of them is the prominence of video-on-demand services in the way Europeans enjoy audiovisual content. These services, however, are not included in the scope of the Digital Services Act package. One may wonder why, and it is exactly what we are going to discuss today with the help of expert contributions and the panel discussions with stakeholders from the sector. We will also look into how to ensure fair and transparent behaviors through the current regulatory tools in place, such as the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, which is the main legal framework for VOD services. Well, we'll start by looking at the market, and a short video presentation of my colleague Gilles Fontaine, head of the market department of the European Audiovisual Observatory, will give us an overview of the types of VOD services operating in the European audiovisual ecosystem. Lean back and enjoy.
Good afternoon. I have a few minutes to share some characteristics of the video-on-demand market. And I must say that the difficulty starts right away with the title of my presentation. I am indeed unsure whether we can talk about the video-on-demand market as such, because the category comprises very different models. Let's look at the business models of the video service. And there are at least three: transaction on a program-per-program basis, subscription to a package of audiovisual works, and advertising. I think we can say that there are probably less similarities between these categories of VOD services than between each of them and what we could call the traditional audiovisual services. Similarity between physical video and TVOD, between pay TV and SVOD, between free TV and AVOD. And moreover, boundaries are blurry, and let me give you 4 examples. Catch-up television services, either free or pay, increasingly include works which have not been broadcast before. Pay broadcasters often package the access to the linear and on-demand offers within a unique subscription. And advertising is the business model of, let's say, pure AVOD services, but also of catch-up TV services and of video sharing platforms. And finally, SVOD services may be bundled with other goods and services, for instance, delivery services or consumer electronics. Let's talk now about distribution, and here again the situation is quite complex in respect of the relationships between VOD services and pay TV distributors. Several distribution models are in place, and let me list at least 4. We have full over-the-top services, auto-distributed. We have services distributed by a pay TV packager, be it a cable or IPTV operator, and where this pay TV packager retains the customer relationship. We have also services referenced by a cable or IPTV operator, but in that case, it is the VOD service which keeps the subscriber relationship. And finally, we have services operated by the cable or the IPTV operators themselves. Moving to market data. Let's note that there are limits to a precise evaluation of the VOD market, in particular for the very reasons I have mentioned before. Still, figures show that SVOD is the fastest growing segment and begins to be significant when compared to pay TV. That TVOD is still growing, but has started to mature. And as regards AVOD, we simply do not have reliable figures as the market is only emerging. And a final word on the main player active on the different VOD markets. Here again, we lack some data to describe each of these markets, and I will therefore focus on SVOD. The perspective is obviously different if you take a European perspective or a country-by-country perspective. From a Europe point of view, it is arithmetically obvious that services active in all or most European countries have a higher share of the European market than services active in only a couple of them. So, at European level, the market share of the top 4 SVOD services is about 80%. The situation is more nuanced when you look at the country level, where, in certain cases, national players make it to the top 3. And with this, I conclude my presentation, hoping to have made at least one point, the complexity of the VOD markets. Thank you.
Indeed, the VOD market is certainly complex, as this video presentation showed. And we will now add another layer of complexity, starting the discussion of the notion of gatekeepers in the audiovisual sector, both from a regulatory and competition point of view. Our expert of today, Oliver Budzinski, Professor of Economic Theory at Ilmenau University of Technology, will help us shed light on this. Oliver's research interests include competition economics and policy, media economics, law and economics. He has published several books, more than 50 articles in peer-reviewed journals, as well as more than 40 chapters in conference volumes, handbooks, and other books. So welcome, Oliver. And as I mentioned in my introduction, our point of departure is that VOD platforms, they are not part of the scope of the DSA package. Now, this does not mean that the VOD sector might be immune, let's say, from situations that could look similar to the ones of the gatekeepers as described in the DSA package, notably in the Digital Markets Act. So what would be the features that we would need to look at? Can you guide us through these intricacies, Oliver? The screen is yours.
Yeah, Maya, thank you very much for having me here and for giving me the opportunity to discuss the gatekeeper features in market, in the VOD market. And I brought some slides that I just want to share with you. Just a second. Okay. So, of course, when we look into economic theory, then usually we have the idea that effective competition should prevent gatekeeping power. And when we talk about digital gatekeepers, then we all think about companies that are dominating their markets, like Google search engines, like the app stores from Apple or Google in their ecosystems, like Facebook with its daughter companies, Instagram and WhatsApp. in the social network markets, although we could already start to think, what about TikTok coming up? And of course, when we talk about gatekeepers, also many think of things like Amazon's marketplace. But there already the problem starts to say, what is exactly dominance? I mean, the Google search engine in many areas has more than 90% market share, but already if we talk about e-commerce and Amazon marketplace, it becomes difficult to say what exactly is the market, what exactly belongs to the market. And in Gilles' presentation, we already saw that this is an issue for video on demand, especially. So on the video on demand VOD market, in the moment at least, we do have lots of competition between SVOD services. I listed a couple, but don't be angry if your favorite one is not among that. I could continue the list. There are more than a couple of hundred listed who are providing VOD services in the moment. However, this is not everything. This is not all. The VOD services also stand in competition to things like YouTube, which we provided empirical evidence in our research that indeed people are deciding at prime time in the evening, especially young people, do I watch a Netflix series or do I watch some YouTube videos, creating competition between these different types of audiovisual content providers, and of course also with linear television. So we have lots of competition here, no domination a la Google search engine. So the question could be, is there no gatekeeper issues here? And this may exactly be also the idea behind not including VOD into the packages. Now, when we talk about gatekeeper effects, then the question is, what does create a gatekeeper? What makes you a gatekeeper? And one of the first things that come to our mind and that are incredibly intensively discussed in all the other markets are network effects related to platforms and the platform characteristics of digital services. However, in the VOD market, we don't have that much. Most of the VOD services are actually only partly or not at all resembling these kind of platforms. So this may be an issue why this topic is not so much discussed here. The second part where gatekeeper power can come from is that often data-based business models using user data, consumer data, in order to create a good experience for the user and for other targeted advertising and for other things. This often comes with advantages of size, meaning the more data you have, the better you are. So this may be an issue in VOD as well, that the big services with the high market shares, they can increase their advantage by having lots of consumer data, although there is also a diminishing return to getting even more data. So this alone is maybe not sufficient as well. But there are two more things that we need to focus on. One thing is the issue from the consumer side, that one-stop shopping, of course, is very attractive. And if there are lots of video on demand services offering different contents, then it puts a burden on the consumers that they have to manage multiple subscriptions. We hear that very loud and clear here in Europe from all the football fans who have to manage multiple subscription in order to see their league games and the Euro and Champions League games, and can't only have one subscription and one provider. They need to be subscribers at many services. And that creates a burden. And another thing, and obviously this is a force that favors to use only one service. And then the next thing is especially important. In the video on demand market, very strongly, we can see vertical integration across all the different stages of the market, meaning producing content, distributing content, and so on and so forth. The merger of AT&T Time Warner is a good example for that, creating a company that starts with producing content, distributes it, and also brings it via the internet lines to the households. We have Disney as a big integrated company, but we also have the upstream endeavors from Netflix, Amazon, and co. who start to produce their own contents. So please go to the next slide, which is also the final one. So in other words, the combination of vertical integration with the wish of consumers for one-stop shopping and the use of personalized data, especially in the context of algorithmic search and recommendation systems, this may actually lead to gatekeeper effects like foreclosure, meaning that small fringe outside competitors do not get content anymore to the distribution channel or do not get onto the service anymore, and self-preferencing, which means that although the content of competitors is also within the service, is available in the service, the company who is running the distribution system, the VOD company, has an interest to steer the audience toward their own contents or towards the contents of their partners. And the search and recommendation systems telling you, if you look this, then you're probably interested in that, and ranks search results if you look for something. This is a good instrument for doing so and for preferencing your own content and your content of the content of your partners over the content of your competitors. And to end, modern economic theory tells us that we don't need one company to dominate the market, get gatekeeper effects like the ones I just described. A certain size is already sufficient for that. And in particular, what we start to call outstanding relevance across markets within an ecosystem is actually very, very important. So if you are prevalent, if you are present in different areas within such an ecosystem, different market stages in all the different areas, and even if you're not dominating any of that, then using these gatekeeping instruments or becoming a gatekeeper in effect is absolutely possible. And so in conclusion, we can vertically integrated players can be gatekeepers also in VOD, even without dominating the market like the Google search engine. So despite the interruption, I hope I sort of remained in time, and thank you very much for your attention.
You did absolutely, Oliver, and thank you very much for this. I think the conclusion is indeed very interesting, that the discussion on the gatekeepers, it doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with dominance. And if you look at the definition introduced by the Digital Markets Act in Article 3, it seems to follow this reasoning. I mean, the
Exactly.
3 criteria, just to remind them to the audience, is to have a significant impact on the internal market, to operate a core platform service which serves as an important gateway, which was also what you referred to with the outstanding relevance across the markets, of course,
Exactly.
and the entrenched and endurable position in its operations. So do you see a match here?
Exactly. I think the reason that VOD is not so much part of the package is indeed because the desire to make this regulation is driven by the obvious dominators. And in VOD, also because the market is younger, of course, it's also something to do with the maturity of a market. We don't see these obvious dominators yet. But this doesn't mean that we won't see them in the future, and that effects that are relevant here are not already starting. And in the moment, of course, it's still good possible to escape them, although I'm not so sure whether that's upstream in the production chain. There may at some parts already be problems that can be felt. But the question, of course, is, shall we wait until gatekeeping is an issue, or is it maybe helpful to safeguard that we remain in a competitive situation and do not get into the gatekeeper issue? So this is not so much. It doesn't seem to be on the front page of the packages. I'm not saying the packages are ignoring that would be wrong, but it doesn't seem to be the priority.
Absolutely, and we will now discover why, because of course we have here the advantage of having the source. This is a package proposal of the European Commission, so who would be better placed to explain the rationale behind than the Commission itself? So I'm very pleased to welcome today Anna Herold, Head of the Audiovisual and Media Policy Unit at DG Connect. Anna has worked for the European Commission since 2003, dealing with media, audiovisual and telecom policy, as well as competition law. She holds a PhD in law from the European University in Florence and has written also on media law and policy, international trade and competition law. So we will see here, and welcome to you as well, Anna, how economics and law gets a bit intertwined. So as I mentioned in the package, VOD service at the beginning, in the opening, VOD services are not included in the package. So it would be interesting to know from you what has been the reasoning that has led the Commission make this choice. And then comes, of course, the obvious question, since we have seen the market perspective. Do the rules that already are in place for VOD services satisfy the needs that the DSA package seek to address? So Anna, the screen is yours, and we look forward to this tour behind the scenes.
Thank you, Maya, for inviting me and giving the Commission the possibility to explain a bit about the rationale, and also for the observatory for asking this very relevant question that we have certainly very carefully considered. So any choice that has been made in terms of scope, and of course also the substance of the DSA package of both the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act, of course, has been carefully considered and also discussed with the media ecosystem. My team that is responsible for the audiovisual and media ecosystem, of course, engaged very actively with many of the actors in advance to understand their main concerns and to see how the package can complement the regulation that we already have, because I think that this is something that we should absolutely not forget, that the VOD market has been recently quite heavily regulated at the EU level, but I will come to that in a minute. So first, to say a few words about the reasons, no, because this is what you asked, for the fact that neither the Digital Services Act nor, more importantly, because this is in the focus of today's discussion, the Digital Markets Act do not, in effect, cover the video on-demand services. So I think for the Digital Services Act, just as a reminder for ourselves, of course, it has a completely different objective that is less relevant for our discussion today. It creates a very powerful accountability framework for that also ultimately aims at protections of users for online platforms with this graduated level of responsibilities, and it can, while it can well cover the new actors in the media regulation at EU level, namely the video sharing platforms such as YouTube or Facebook, it does not apply to VOD. As regards the Digital Markets Act, what we are discussing today, of course, its objective is quite different. What it aims to ensure is a fair business environment for business users that depend on certain platform services, this famous gatekeepers that we talk today about, in order to offer their services in the single market. And of course, ultimately, the objective is also for consumers to have choice, to have more choice, and the possibility to switch their provider if they want to do so. As it was already, I think, mentioned by you, Maya, what the DMA covers are the so-called core platform services that are considered to be the gatekeepers. We have carefully considered in the impact assessment that preceded the the adoption of these two proposals, and in particular, of course, the DMA, whether the video on demand, the streamers, would need to be included in the scope, and concluded eventually that they shouldn't, because they lack these typical characteristics of multi-sided markets, where the, for example, online search or social networking services somehow are, primary examples of. And the reasoning was also, and Oliver has talked about it a little bit already, that the VOD streaming services, they are characterized certainly by less pronounced network effects, given, and this is of course obvious in this to this audience, given the high cost of producing, in particular, audiovisual content, and also the switching costs are not particularly high for consumers, because it is, of course, for all of us quite easy to cancel our subscriptions. We all know we are mainly talking about subscription video on demand. It was very useful what Gilles has presented to us, and I think that our the focus of the discussion today, I understand, is very much on those players that offer subscription video on demand services. And while it can, of course, be argued that this is quite a concentrated market, I think, an additional consideration that we should keep in mind that it is still a very dynamic market where new players appear. I think we have seen what happened with the arrival of the Disney Plus, and also there is still a vibrant competition that, of course, more from a policy objective from European services, that we would very much want to foster. And these, as Gilles has showed us, can be quite important on the national market in terms of their market share. Having said that, of course, we understand that especially audiovisual producers might have certain problems, issues in their relationship with VODs, in particular the big streamers, in particular, for example, as regards access to data. We have recognized this in the recently adopted Media and Audiovisual Action Plan. We have, of course, noted that the arrival of the big streamers, well, already quite a constant feature of the European audiovisual landscape for quite some years, of course, has had very positive effects in terms of the possibility for content produced in Europe to, let's say, reach wider international appeals. But it also brought some negative trends, like this application of a model that might be less beneficial to European producers, the so-called work for hire model, that can actually very much lock in the talents, producers with a certain platform. Having said that, just to come back to a bit of a final argument for not necessarily wanting to cover such services by the Digital Markets Regulation, I think it is well understood that the focus of the regulation on these core platform services is certainly on those gatekeepers that directly prevent access for business users to the data to their own customers. And this is absolutely not the case in the VOD market. And as I think I have already said, and Oliver also hinted at, we are looking at two different markets, with clearly one with a very high level of concentration and very high barriers to entry, while this might not necessarily be the case in the market we are talking here about. I just want to say maybe still that of course this is not the end of the story. There is a possibility in the DMA proposal to change things in the future. I think it's Article 17, yes, that gives the possibility to include more services in the scope of the list of core platform services in the future following a market investigation. So this is maybe one thing I wanted to leave the discussant with. And a second, more important and probably the most important element that we should bear in mind, that the market of the VODs, as I already said in the beginning, has been regulated quite heavily already at the European level. It is, of course, a bit less fashionable because it's something which we already have on the table. It's the revised audiovisual rules, where the streamers have been subjected to quite significant obligations in terms of promotion of European content, and also the prominence of such content on their services, which of course has a direct impact on the algorithm of such services. And then another element that the new directive, the revised audiovisual rules, foresee the possibilities, the explicit possibility for member states to have quite reaching obligations imposed on such services, even if they are cross-border obligations, to invest or contribute otherwise financially to the production of European content. So I think that these elements should not be forgotten in this discussion. And maybe one last element I want to leave you with is that as regards this concept of prominence, there is an ongoing work of European media regulators as what it should mean for VODs. And of course, within the framework of that work, there could be potentially many important elements to be coming in the actual application of the new framework to VODs. So I think I would leave you with that. And of course, I will come back after the end of the discussion and will be very happy to comment on what our colleagues from the industry will tell us now.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I see there is already some life in our chat box, and there is while you were presenting, there is a comment here, and which maybe we can also add on what you said. When discussing the role of gatekeepers, it would be important to consider the intermediary function of gatekeepers. This is what distinguishes between VOD services such as Netflix, Amazon Prime, and video sharing platforms hosting user-generated content such as YouTube. And I guess this was also no part of the reasoning so as to distinguish between the mediated and the unmediated activity.
Exactly. And this is also what I meant when I said that unlike VODs, the market of core platform services, we are talking about multi-sided markets, no? Which is not the case here.
Exactly. Perfect. I'm sure there will be more popping up. So for the moment, I think we have already plenty of food for thought on the table. We have, together with you, Gilles Fontaine and Oliver Budzinski, created a good basis of information. So I think we can now kick off the panel discussion so that we can hear from distinguished representatives from various sectors of the audiovisual sector, of the audiovisual industry. What is their take on this? And we have with us today Cécile Desprangre. She is Executive Director of the Society of Audiovisual Authors, SAA. We have Miruna Erovanu. She is Senior EU Policy Officer at the Association of Commercial Television in Europe, ACT. Alexandra Lebré. She is Managing Director at the European Producers Club, EPC. And Mark Putman, he's President of Eurovod and CEO of Out TV Media Group. And Anna Soler-Bassett, she's Group Head of Content Policy at Vodafone. Welcome to all of you. I will start with Cécile Desprangre. Cécile, as I said, is Executive Director at SAA, which is a collective management organization that Cécile was asked to help set up in 2009 to represent audiovisual authors with the European institutions. And before joining SAA, Cécile was CEO of FERA, the European Network of Film and TV Directors, and she holds, just by the way, a degree in international and European law and a master's degree in international economic law. So you're certainly expert in 360 degrees of what we are talking about in the wider sense. So when we invited you, Cécile, we thought, of course, of the fact that audiovisual works, they need media outlets where the works have to be shown, and authors, they contribute to produce works because they want them to be shown. So your contractual counterparts very often are the video platforms where the works will be showcased. So how do you see these interactions in the current legal environment? Is there anything from the DSA package that you would imagine applicable to the world of VOD providers, considering the different approaches, of course, from the market perspective and the legal one? Cécile, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Maya. I hope you hear me well. Thank you, and hello to everybody. I would like to first start by saying that DSA welcomed the presentation by the Commission of the DSA package. I think there was a necessity for the e-commerce directive to be revised, so it's a welcome proposal because the market changed very much since 2000. Most of the services that exist today didn't exist in 2000, so we are very pleased that a new proposal is on the table. But we have been a bit disappointing that the same categories of services and the structure of the e-commerce directive has been kept. We think that online services should be liable for the illegal activities conducted by the users, such as piracy, and they should take all proactive measures to limit these illegal activities and stop them. Having said that, when it comes to video on demand services, we are not interested in including them in the scope of the DSA. VOD services have editorial responsibility on the content they offer to the audience. They are responsible for the organization and the selection of the program. So they are, as Anna already said, they are covered by the Audiovisual Media Services Directive as main competitors to broadcasters, whose the Audiovisual Media Services Directive is the main regulation. So we can see some overlap between the Audiovisual Media Services Directive and the DSA when it comes to video sharing platforms. But it's only in part that when they offer also programs. So the objective of the two regulations are very different, and the DSA is about liability. If VOD platform would be covered by the DSA, it would lower their responsibility. So that's not what we are aiming for. As far as the DMA is concerned, for me, it's a new animal. I would say it's not a legal instrument we are very familiar with. It looks like it's inspired by competition approach, but that it's a regulatory instrument. So it's more difficult, I would say, for us to address. But here again, we understand that VOD services are not covered. And we are not calling for the VOD services to be included. However, there are very large online platforms who will probably be or are probably qualified as gatekeepers who offer VOD services. I'm just thinking about Amazon, who has part of its service, Amazon Prime, and offer to the consumers of on-demand films and series. As far as DSA members are concerned, we have concerns on this type of bundling offers that this kind of services provide, because it makes it difficult for SA members, so who are the collective management organizations managing audiovisual authors' rights. So when they have to calculate a price for a tariff for the audiovisual authors' remuneration, such bundling offers makes it difficult to calculate such a price. So I don't know if the DMA can help in this regard. That's the question, my question for the expert. Having said that, I'm very interested in this debate today about the DMA approach, this gatekeeper notion, and to see if there is a possible translation of this concept into the VOD services market. There is a discussion, are there dominant services or not? As far as we are concerned, we can see that there today the VOD distribution channel is a must-have to access the audience in Europe. So I would say that for me, from not a pure expert on this topic, I can see a sort of gatekeeper concept being able to apply to some of the VOD services. And this the existence of dominant services in the VOD market raise a number of questions on our side. I maybe will focus on one of them, which is the European model of authors' rights. The second topic is transparency, but I'm sure there are other panelists who would be interested in talking about transparency. So if I have to be a bit short, I will first address the authors' rights model we have in Europe. Anna Herold mentioned that the Media and Audiovisual Action Plan that the Commission proposed in December acknowledged that there is maybe a problem with online platforms, VOD services operating in Europe and producing in Europe, and that they can raise a challenge to the European model of production and intellectual property rights. But the problem is that the action plan just raised the issue and does not propose any remedy to this problem, which is a real problem. So I'm going just to describe a bit the situation. There is a real risk that the European model of authors' rights is overturned by a US copyright and approach, an industrial approach that would deprive European audiovisual authors of their IP rights. So the work for hire model that Anna briefly mentioned is a model used by the US studios. And in this model, the creators, screenwriters, and directors of audiovisual works are not considered as authors. They are workers, employees of the studio to write the script, to direct the films. And the intellectual property rights belongs to the studio itself. So this is the US copyright approach and the work for hire model where and the status of the screenwriters and directors. In Europe, we have a completely different model.
Yeah, I think I just need you to ask you to go to the conclusion. Time is a tyrant, always.
Okay, so this model is challenging the audiovisual authors' rights. And this VOD platform then offered to European authors a buyout contract in exchange of a lump sum payment. They take all the rights and this is contrary to the philosophy of the authors' rights and also to the progress achieved in the 2019 directive and the concept of fair and proportionate remuneration. So if I have time later, Maya, I will develop that.
Yeah, but that's good. But would you see ideally, but really telegraphically, anything in the DSA package that could be helpful for this?
To be honest, no.
No. Okay.
No,
So we
I
would
don't
need
see.
something new.
Probably.
Okay. Thank you very much, Cécile. I've taken due note of your concerns, but also of the aspects that you appreciate, which I understand are quite many. And since you mentioned media outlets when describing, of course, that works, they have to go somewhere, and there is a need to reach the viewers. Of course, it is natural to call in the outlets themselves. So I'm very happy to bring now on screen Miruna Erovano. She is a senior EU policy officer at ACT. ACT represents, that is well known, I think, the interests of the leading commercial broadcasters across Europe. Miruna has worked several years in Brussels on intellectual property, digital and media policy, and joined ACT after having worked for European press publishers. And her experience is an all-rounder because she has also experience from the European Parliament, the Romanian Senate, and based on her master's in European law and bachelor's in law from the University of Bucharest. So Miruna, welcome to you as well. We are very interested in counting on your contribution to the discussion, because ACT counts among its members many important VOD players. If I'm not mistaken, you have Sky, Disney, Canal Plus, Discovery. You have really quite many of the biggies. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what is your view on the scope? Are there any DSA-like rules that we already have and that can, for example, be used if there are any gatekeeping issues, as we have seen might happen in terms of behaviors? The screen is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having us. And indeed, our members actually, I think the vast majority of them have of course different sizes of VOD services, which goes to show that there is competition on the market in a certain kind of way. On the question of what rules would apply to our sector, as we see under the DSA. What we saw on the DSA proposal, which is the review of the e-commerce directive, the DSA proposal actually is a horizontal instrument that applies without prejudice to the AVMSD, which the AVMSD is the main piece of regulation that legislates our behavior. So having said that, we need to really differentiate between online intermediaries and the European Commission trying to fulfill a legislative gap and a void, and heavily regulated entities such as commercial broadcasters and video on demand services that have full editorial responsibility, full accountability, legal representatives. So they are all-rounded full editorial services. This is why we think the discussion of introducing the VOD in the scope of the DSA is quite unwarranted, because we don't see that there's a gap there. There's no need for more accountability. We're already completely accountable. Now, on the DMA, I can understand that it's tempting when we have a very new and revolutionary instrument to try to fix all the world's problems in one instrument. However, this opens a very slippery slope and a very dangerous discussion. Why? In our view, the DMA proposal is an evidence-based proposal. It actually relies on several competition cases that the European Commission has pursued for the last decade. It has been welcomed by a plethora of stakeholders beyond the audiovisual sector. A plethora of sectors actually are welcoming this exercise. Why? Because the remedies foreseen in 101 and 102, which is the classic competition instrument of the European Commission, have proved to be insufficient to address certain types of behaviors of certain types of operators. again, here as well, the European Commission is trying to address a legislative void, not to over-regulate already regulated entities. This is very well shown from the exception that we have for telecom operators under the DMA. So there is a void on the digital market. The digital market and the advertising market is completely dominated by a handful of players. And we believe that maintaining the scope to what was actually identified by the European Commission is absolutely vital for the success of this proposal, which is a proposal that our members have been waiting for and have wholeheartedly welcomed. It's an excellent first step in establishing the famous level playing field in the digital market between a plethora of services and a handful of gatekeepers. And we find it quite a good step forward. Now, when it comes to the VOD market itself, despite of its complexities, etc., and despite being subjected to a complex regulatory architecture, it remains a growing market. It's a younger market than what the DMA is seeking to address. And we see, and the example was given earlier of Disney Plus that has made a performance in the last year. So we don't see any lock-in effects. We don't see any huge barriers to enter. I think the emergence of VOD services are actually answering to consumer demands that consumers want to watch what they want when they want it. That's why it's video on demand. So we would caution against trying to create a situation where the DMA would address all things for all people, because it is not. It's a real targeted instrument, and there's a reason for that. And it's in the proposal.
But what about Miruna, since we, one thing is the DMA, which, does not apply, that's clear. But another aspect are the features, no, that also Oliver mentioned, and certain behaviors. And when you have big operators on the markets, of course, it's quite natural that certain behaviors may happen. Is the current regulatory tool satisfactory? Do you find all what you need in the toolbox that we have? Because the AVMSD does not address, of course, this in particular.
I mean, 101 and 102 always remains open for entities that want to take the route of competition. If size is a problem and there are certain issues, I think the classic competition, that's why the Commission is continuously pursuing that route as well, because it is, and it remains efficient. Just the DMA is not the right instrument to introduce every possible concern. I hope
that's clear. Also because it's an ex-ante approach, and you have all the competition rules that, of course, apply. Then there is I found very interesting these articles 5 and 6 of the DMA about the obligations. Do you see anything there that could, for example, inspire some competition-related investigations if there are issues to address? There are, for example, references to ranking, and ranking is, of course, very important when it comes to recommendation systems, which is mentioned in the DSA. Now, in the cooking, there are also rules on AI. There is the recently announced Media Freedom Act. There is lots of activity in the media field right now. Do you see anything that could help solve any possible difficulties in the relationships between big VOD platforms and producers, authors, those who are more dependent on having outlets for their works?
Under the DMA, no, but there have been several instruments in the former legislature. And I dare to refer you to the Copyright Directive, which I think the remuneration chapter is quite helpful for smaller players in general, and addresses this specific copyright issue. Under the DMA, however, we have self-preferencing for players that really establish the rules of the game online, and that we are absolutely all of us dependent on if we have a digital presence at all. So, and we also really believe that the scope of the DMA and maintaining it restricted to what the Commission has proposed is directly dependent on the robustness and of the obligations in Articles 5 and 6. If we start widening the scope, we will have to water down the obligations. That's the way it will work. So we're very, very cautious of the scope of the DMA.
That's a very clear message. So better have clear obligations for the big tech operators that are addressed than watering down and risking losing the whole everything. There is a comment here that concerns capturing streaming services as broadcasters, which came up during your intervention. You can maybe take a look at it, and we can get back to it later, so that I can, in the meantime, move, because there is quite some life in the chat box now. So take a look, and we will come back to that later. Now I would like to get the producers on screen, and we have with us Alexandra Lebre. She is Managing Director of the European Producers Club, a position that Alexandra has held since 2002. EPC, but nobody would say that, Alexandra. It could have happened yesterday. Your enthusiasm is still super strong, and your focus has always been to encourage collaboration, joint financing, and co-production across countries, which I guess was also the reason why in 2013 you were decorated as Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres by the French government for your dedication in favor of European cinema. So thank you very much for being with us today. And I look very much to hear from your point of view how you see the game working. VOD platforms are, of course, natural environment for the works you produce. We have mentioned throughout the discussion until now that VOD outlets are the way that now most people enjoy audiovisual content on, also maybe due to COVID, that obliges us to stay at home. So what is your take on this? Are there any VOD providers that maybe have a gateway function? Do you have some challenges that you experience in your daily life that you could share with us, or is everything okay? The screen is yours, Alexandra.
Thank you, Maya, and the Audiovisual Observatory for organizing this event and inviting us to speak. I would like to thank also Gilles for his wonderful presentation that shows that VOD platforms borders is very tiny, and there is so mixed model that we can add even to this presentation. I would like also to thank Oliver's presentation that showed that vertical integration has a lot of risks for our industries. When I first read the DSA and the DMA, which took me at least 24 hours, I was not sure to understand clearly if audiovisual media services were covered, but they are not. How can they not be in the field? We all agree that a small number of large providers of core platform services have emerged in the market with considerable economic power, which are likely to lead in many cases to serious imbalances in bargaining power and consequently to unfair practices and conditions for business users. The recital 4 of the DMA that I'm quoting in the text is the exact reality of the day-to-day life of independent producers. Are independent production companies business users? Yes, they are business users. They develop screenplays with screenwriters, acquire rights, gather talents, produce films and TV dramas, and deliver them to streaming platforms, which in return delivers those works to end users, in this case, audiences throughout Europe. Are VOD platforms acting as gatekeepers? A small number of large pan-European VOD platforms fulfill all the conditions describing gatekeepers in Article 3. They have a significant impact on the internal market. They operate a core platform service which serves as an important gateway for business users to reach end users. They have now gained and rooted a sustainable position in their operation and are likely to have such a position in the near future. Yes, they are. Are VOD platform services serving as core platform services? We understand that the DMA is to deal with core platform services that act as intermediaries between business users and end users. This currently includes video sharing platform services. Why VOD platform would not be included in the definition of core platform services is the question we want to raise at this stage. Is the Lex Specialist a good argument? The argument that VOD platforms are already covered by the AVMS could also be made about video sharing platforms. And yet they are included in the DMA and thus will be covered by both pieces of legislation. Why our business relations and transparency measures will be protected when we are producing or selling our work to YouTube and not to Disney+? Where is the logic? It seems unfair. Regarding access to data and transparency, some of the practices of gatekeepers which are set out in Article 5 and 6 are relevant for us, and in particular, all that regards transparency of data. Again, it is hard to see why producers engaging with gatekeepers' video sharing platform services should be entitled to these very important rights and yet not with gatekeeper video services. Let's Zoom or Google into the needs of independent producers. Even our vocabulary belongs to US gatekeepers. The EPC believes that it's vitally important that there should be a debate about the inclusion of pan-European VOD platforms in the definition of core platform services within the DMA. Independent productions company, as business users of those services, should have the same rights in their dealings with those services as they will have in relation to video sharing platform services under the DMA. We absolutely need to have the AVMS into scope of the DMA when it comes to transparency in both data and algorithms used. We independent producers are in great danger by having no choice than to accept the business model of US streamers that are having a dominant position in the market and leave us with no bargaining power. When commissioning a show, those VOD platforms take all rights and all future revenues, while paying the cost of the production of the film of the TV drama. With this business model, they are locking it out, not in. We are locked out of the IP we created, even if we have invested our money, our time, our risks into creating that IP. Without any revenues covering the losses producers face developing a wide range of IP, the independent production company will be out of money very fast. We need a balance in the contractual relationship. That's why we published a few days ago a code of fair practices that should raise the awareness of the situation of the independent producers. I would like to quote Thierry Breton, last intervention on this subject to conclude. Online platforms set the rules and their terms and conditions. It's time for Europe to set its own term and condition. It needs to be coordinated and take ambitious action at EU level. We need to create a safer digital space to create a level playing field, allowing innovation and competitiveness. All these words could be mined without any offense to Commissioner Breton, as they reflect the exact needs of independent producers facing the market power that the streamers have taken on the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexandra. Your ideas are very clear. That's you're not very happy. I understand. But let's try to do the exercise of seeing if there is anything that could be used. I see there is also a comment here in the chat box referring to the copyright directive, and that could maybe also be a tool that could be used to address certain imbalances. We will have a separate webinar on that, so we will maybe leave it for a separate discussion. But for example, when it comes to transparency, what is your experience in the daily life? You get nothing? What is the reality? Do you know how your works perform?
No, it depends on your bargaining power. If you are an important producer, you can negotiate to have a part of the data, but the data is very simple. It cannot allow you to understand who is your audience, when they are watching, what did they like, where are they? It's a very simple data, and it's not a general rule. And this data has to be, it's a secret data. It's under an NDA clause, so you cannot share it with your with your authors, with your partners. It's not a rule. It's something that is given but it's not a rule. And we want the same rule to be applied to everyone.
Okay, so it is something that depends on the goodwill for the moment. That is basically your concern. And when it comes to, for example, recommendation system, do you have any experiences on that? For example, on the works that are being recommended by the VOD platforms, are you involved in that? Do you get any, just to explain to our audience how it works in reality?
I wish I could. I don't have I don't have any experience in that. It's the algorithm is are absolutely non-transparent, and you don't know. I don't know if someone knows how it works.
Sounds like there are some challenges indeed out there. So I'll take note of your concerns as expressed, and I will now check them with a VOD provider, since our next speaker comes from the VOD platforms, and we have the president of Eurovod with us, Mark Putman. He's also CEO of Out TV Media Group. After being responsible for new business development within the cable and pay TV business for years, Mark decided to explore the opportunity of launching a gay-minded TV channel in 2004, and in 2018 he launched what could be called the gay Netflix VOD platform to address the LGBTI audience in Europe, the Out TV Media Group, which has a 360 degrees content exploitation model and also owns the film distribution partner Profan Media. So welcome, Mark Putman, to us. You have a wide experience with audiovisual business. I guess you know it a bit in and out. So I'm very happy to see with you what kind of best or worst practices you can maybe share with us and with the audience when it comes to the issues that we, for example, have heard from Alexandra, the issue of transparency, what happens with performance data, audience data, rankings and recommendation system. Is it really a black box like this, or are we also having some good examples that we can report about? The screen is yours, Mark.
Okay, now thank you so much for inviting me, Maya, this afternoon, and I'm really happy to speak on behalf of Eurovod, the association of all the independent VOD platforms in Europe. We're a bit different maybe than the traditional platforms we mostly talk about, the Netflix and Disney Plus, and maybe also some of the national larger VOD platforms connected to national broadcasters. So therefore we might have sometimes a bit of slightly different approach, since we, from our original DNA, of course, are really focusing on European European audiovisual products as such. So I think that makes it already maybe a bit more closer to the partners have been discussing and putting their complaints on the table this afternoon. But saying that, within our family of members, there of course are very different people involved in the VOD operations as they run. But generally speaking, yes, I think since we have been created a bit later than the traditional VOD platforms, we had the advantage to use technology which was a bit more developed and much more advanced. So I think for some of our members, we definitely have more defined algorithms and possibilities to gain the data we share, but also to reshare that with our users, but also with our partners who provide us the content. So it's of course still in a relatively small scale, and this is a process we are still developing and trying to improve over time. So definitely we're working on that to try to share first of all also with our consumers who we ask their data from, and also to give it as much as we try to do to give it back, so that people and the consumers know what we ask and why we ask it, and what is in their interest if they share it with us, and we can provide better products and services from them in the long run. And of course, on the other side is the request from producers and content providers who, of course, want to know how well or how good they can learn from the data we gather. And from our perspective, it's not a matter that we never want to share it. It's sometimes really indeed a complex puzzle to solve and to give back. And sometimes it's also the matter of how the algorithms are defined if and how it can be collected and to make more transparent. But the request and the wish from the partners been speaking here this afternoon, I fully understand and also agree with them, because in the end of the day, it's also in our interest that we create stories and new audiovisual products, which of course fit into the taste of the audience we serve. So I don't see from that perspective always as a kind of contradictory kind of interest or a non-willingness to cooperate on that. But as I said, there are sometimes just in the stage where we are still difficulties to get this kind of technical complex data back on the table. But the transparency notice, I fully understand, and I understand that that's something we will definitely improve over time.
That sounds like a positive statement, because of course you have the data. I mean, the audience data are maybe secret, but they exist. So I guess it's, yeah. So the issue is also, of course, when you are yourself producing and compete with the producers that you host. So there, of course, there might be situations where there is an interest not to disclose in order to protect oneself. So I imagine the decisions are, of course, not always easy to take. I was very interested in how you build up the recommendation system. So basically, it's not a passive algorithm with a big black box, but you are actively involving your audience. Is that a survey you do? Well, how does it work?
Well, let's talk about my own business, because that's the most easy example I can give. The way how we work in two different ways, we developed actually a kind of platform which is not just a box of content like the traditional platforms like Disney and Netflix and that kind of platforms work. We actually involve the user profile data to make it more visible, that it's not just an anonymous way of watching, which you can definitely, by seeing each other's profiles, getting more information about each other, and therefore also see the viewing data from your friend or whatever. That can also be a recommendation itself for you too. So it is a kind of different way how to elaborate the content you have in store, which you'd like to share to a broader audience, and use your kind of friends or people you know as a kind of reference point. Secondly, next to that, they also have been working on the recommendation systems, which actually start from a kind of more human kind of perspective, which ask you to define what you'd like to see, what you have preferences. We store it, we make it visible that that data is stored, and how we use it. And of course, you can also change it to the mood you are in, because you might not be interested in a rom-comedy every day, as that might be your initial preferences. So we try to make it a bit more intelligent, but also on different layers than just a traditional layer of, if you like this, you might like that, because I understand that's where we come from, but that's not always the most relevant way to suggest other content to your viewers.
Now, that's very interesting, and I imagine that others who might be interested in these data are the producers themselves. So how their work perform and how they are liked. Is there anything you share on this? Or, I mean, because what you talked about now was the preferences of the users, not the viewers themselves. So what about those who supply the works? Since it is, I mean, on the VOD platforms, of course, you host also content that you buy the rights for. Do you give any feedback to them as to these recommendation systems and the likes? Or how does it work?
The most practical level is, of course, the royalty reports. They can see in relation to the total viewing time and the total number of what has been gained, what their percentage is, so they can relatively see if they perform well or not. That's the kind of most basic level of information, which is already telling you something. And for instance, when it comes to the European products, since, for instance, we also have non-European products on board, we also notice that mostly European films specifically are not always working really well. And this has nothing mostly to do with the fact that there's a lot of content being produced, but there are no brands to consumer, which is, from American perspective, they're much more successful in creating from a product a brand. And that's actually a big difference and a big problem for the European industry. We create a lot of great quality and a lot of product, but it's not known, and it is not apparently and initially not relevant to that audience. So it's our job as being the content aggregator to find those recommendation systems and to work on creating a higher level of connectivity between users to make that kind of content available and also interesting for people to start watching. I think that's, from our perspective, the challenge. We should be more intelligent than the traditional operators in this area to add that kind of added value, so that that kind of non-branded content, to say so, gets to a higher level, that it becomes to a level that it might become a brand. And for that reason, giving a higher exposure and therefore more people and a bigger audience share. But of course, these are processes that takes time, and it's not that easy to implement immediately. But that kind of road we foresee is very relevant for the near future, because either the producer loves to have that kind of feedback, we understand that, but also the consumer is not just willing just to share all this kind of data if they don't know what we are going to do with it. So yeah, I think this is a kind of logical process where we are into, and that of course will evolve in time.
Yeah, no, sounds like indeed an intricate puzzle, but this makes me think of the prominence obligations that come from the AVMS directive. So that could maybe also be a way of using algorithms there in order to promote the visibility of the European content you refer to on your platform. So and Anna mentioned that the regulator is also working on that. So indeed, it's something that might pop up in the future as a useful tool. So thank you, Mark, for having shared your experience. It's good to hear that there is also something good happening out there. So I am now pleased to call on screen our last panelist, who comes from a converged media and telco environment. We have Anna Soler-Bassett. She is Group Head of Content Policy at Vodafone. What does that mean? She leads Vodafone's government's affair for content policy, dealing with copyright, AVMS, DSA, competition, consumer, and at global and group level, and works on many other also key reforms such as 5G, cloud and CDN, security, foreign affairs. And Anna is a legally trained regulatory and public policy professional with extensive international experience. So I'm sure we picked up the right person from Vodafone to share your experience, which is certainly particular. Welcome to you, Anna, because Vodafone has many hats. Now, depending on the business that is being carried out, it can be a phone call operator, it can be an internet service provider. You also provide linear services, VOD services. So I guess this must be quite challenging. So how does the DSA package impact on all this? Do you see yourself in any of these rules, and what's your view? Also considering the discussions that have been taken place so far. The screen is yours.
Thank you, and thank you, Maya, and thank you to the EAO for having us here. We're delighted to continue to be part of the conversation on the digital services package, which, on the whole, we're really delighted has come out, and we've tried to be a part with all this sort of policy development, and would really like to see the package as it stands, finalized as soon as possible. As they say, where there's challenge, there's opportunity, and Vodafone certainly wears many hats. So I'm hoping not to be asked about Huawei or 5G today, say. But I think it's fair to say that our view as both a pay TV and VOD provider is that, as has been said by other panelists, and of course reflected by extensive European Commission research and analysis in the field, this is just not the right package where we see that VOD should be regulated. It's a heavily regulated sector. MSD, we have copyright. They're going through transposition at member state level, or recently transposed in many areas. No evidence of market failure that we see that hasn't otherwise already been addressed. Actually, useful to call attention to the sort of history that converged telco providers face in terms of being really, really heavily regulated by competition law as it currently stands. So particularly given we're a converged player, for us it would make no sense to sort of have the two sort of competition regimes standing in parallel, because we're certainly extremely, very heavily regulated already through competition principles as a TV provider, and obviously we take those obligations very seriously when we're engaging with the competition authority of the Commission and NRAs on them. A little about us and our TV interests, if I may, because I think, as you said, we're known a lot of the time for our networks and phone services. So for those who may not be aware, we are a pan-European TV company, and we distribute European content, voices, stories all across the EU. So our services on the whole, the converged services, reach 273 million people in the EU, over 61% of the EU27 population. We are one of Europe's largest pay TV operators and distributors of audiovisual services. So we have 22 million subscribers in 10 EU member states, linear TV in all and VOD in most, both a mix of TVOD and SVOD. Of course, we are a large contributor of AVMSD levies to support content producers. EU content production, we think it's really important that European voices and stories are heard. We think the prominence obligations and the development of new guidance around it is going to be really important for us. And of course, we also work to celebrate EU content where we can through sponsorship of festivals and so on. So Berlinale in Germany, we've of course done historically the Karlovy Film Festival in Czechia, my family's home jurisdiction. So at a high level, we have been, anticipating with excitement the package. And I think if you take into account the super commercially competitive field for content distribution all across Europe, it's dominated by a range of factors. I mean, there's increased cord cutting of linear TV in favor of VOD delivery, particularly where it's innovative, online and device neutral. So eyeballs want to follow their devices wherever you go in the world, cross-border. People want content available 24/7 on all devices, no loss of latency or network quality. It is, of course, dominated, as many panelists have pointed out, by highly profitable international players with huge content production budgets that are completely integrated. Production budgets are also increasingly expensive. So for someone like us to get into that space, it's extremely challenging. And of course, as the EAO has highlighted, just this trend towards convergence, it's been incredibly accelerated by COVID-19. So for us, the package represents a really good balance of a new level playing field for the entirety of the TMT sector. And I would caution us against focusing so much in on ourselves within the VOD world that we sort of eat our own tail, as it were. As I said, and as other panelists have said, we have the AVMSD, we have the copyright directive. It's a heavy regulated field. Competition law for converged telcos is powering along at pace. If I may, a couple of specific comments as well on each element of the package, and then I finish up before we move to the discussion. I mean, the DSA obviously for us is separate to the most of this discussion, but as certain EU rapporteurs to the package have said, the policy aims of the DSA are aimed at almost ensuring that, the US-dominated OTT platforms are sort of a public square for discourse and content provision online. So I really liked a conception of one rapporteur that said, social platforms or pure content OTT platforms as sort of critical national infrastructure for informed debate, for cracking, ensuring illegal and harmful content is addressed, or already subject to obligations on that as a telco provider, ensuring that political information is true and accurate, that disinformation does not spread. These are very different policy aims to AVMSD and VOD regulation and so on. Of course, AVMSD has obligations for us in terms of how we curate content for children and those with disabilities, but very, very different package. So on the DMA, the ex-ante, horizontal instrument, I think the gatekeeper for criterias and the current list of core services are appropriate for us. As I said, we're already subject to very heavy competition law as a converged telco. And then we also, I would say, are subject to significant precedent in terms of access to our networks, our telco networks, and also must carry rules or rights carried and distributed by us. And then with respect to VOD as a service itself, I mean, it won't be of any surprise to anyone here. We, of course, agree with Anna Herold and the rest of the Commission that, the impact assessment and all throughout economic analysis has shown that there isn't really evidence of market failure for end consumers of VOD. So in terms of dominance as a platform, Vod is not a search engine, it's not an app store, it's not a social platform for which there are, 2, maybe 3 players in most fields. I mean, we operate in all our Vod markets in a very competitive field with OTTs that are, to be honest, primarily US-based and not pan-European like us. So, of course, they've been mentioned today. We have Disney+, HBO, Amazon, my prior employer, we have Apple, we have Sky, which is UK, Paramount Plus, Netflix, we of course have French distributors, and Canal Plus from France. And as I said earlier, linear TV is also increasingly subject to cord cutting, so there's huge commercial imperative driving, I think, a lot of consumer demand, such that there's just an incredible amount of commercial competition. Or if I may, perhaps I could say brutal commercial reality. Content really is still king. Customers give us a lot of feedback when they cord cut or switch away from us or to us, that they prefer our content selection, our library, they prefer our price, they prefer our quality of content delivery, or they don't when they switch. So we don't really think there is a one-stop shop for VOD content. And all the time, I mean, it used to be every year, but with COVID, it's every few months. We see new commercially competitive types of services to meet, I think, what we see is this pretty voracious and unforgiving appetite for cross-border content on demand at all times through quality content delivery on our networks.
What about, Anna, these issues of transparency? I mean, you are such a big operator with many businesses that are kept together, and you distribute, as you mentioned, plenty of channels. Do you have any practices to share? Even there is no obligations of these because this is a bit the core of the issues that I think we can identify from what have been said by some of the participants, that there is not much transparency on many of the performance data. Is that something that could be worked on? And then I will ask Alison to maybe bring in also the other panelists so that we can have a little discussion together on this. What are your practices independently from the DMA, which I understand your position on?
Sure. I mean, I don't want to speak specifically for us in this context. I mean, I'll defer to the ACT. It is the association representative in terms of practices in the market. But video on demand generally as a type of service, it provides strictly curated content and without advertising in the case of SVOD, right? And so there's no sort of general use of first or third party data in the same way as dominant services as envisaged by the DSA. And even where data is used, the level of data that providers sort of go into and analyze, it's not a data service in the way that a Facebook or a Google or a YouTube, a VSP would be in terms of their ability to do micro-invasive sort of targeting. And on top of that, as I said, like we're involved in the business of production. So, I won't say suffer from, but we have obligations around must carry and linear that we're subject to, that mean, the economics of content production are not currently, I would say, viable for us. We would love to do more with, the members of, for example, Alexandra's association under AVMSD to ensure that European stories and voices are given due prominence under AVMSD. We actually see that as a competitive advantage for us as an EU TV and VOD player, right? We want to be able to promote more locally relevant content for local European markets and not just, generic stories coming out of other jurisdictions outside the EU. But this, I think, is a question for the AVMSD as well. And I think, to the prior speaker's point as well, the DMA is very focused on competition in terms of the benefit of the consumer. And I completely take Alexandra's points as regard business users. We've had similar worries regarding other practices of primarily OTT players in terms of the dominance of business users in certain cases. And I would say that we also take really, really, carefully and responsibly some of our obligations as regards use of our consumer data, right? So we're very happy to work with partners and providers to write appropriate measures and appropriate metrics, but we would not feel comfortable in a situation where, particularly under GDPR, we're just handing over all data on our consumers' viewing habits or how they use our services in ways where they felt that they were also going to be invasively targeted in a way that we deliberately do not try to target them, compared to, I would say, some of the to some of the other platforms.
Thank you, Anna. That was very clear. We are running a bit out of time, but the discussion is so interesting that I hope you don't mind if we maybe go on for a few more minutes. I would really be happy also to bring on board the other speakers again. So if my colleagues can bring them on screen. I promised Cécile that she could intervene again on the issues transparency, so I have not forgotten that. And then I'm sure that maybe also Miruna would like to intervene again on this issue, and for other panelists if they want. And then I will ask Oliver and Anna Harold to give their final remarks. So Cécile, your issue on transparency that you wanted to mention.
Well, thank you, Maya. I think there are several issues on transparency. There are the issue mentioned by Alexandra when you asked her about what she gets from the streamers. But there is also the issue that stems from the Copyright Directive, Article 19 of the Copyright Directive, which provides that authors and performers should be entitled to receive information on the performance, on the exploitation of their works. And this, if the producers who are their contractual partners don't have the information, they can't provide the information, authors and performers should be able to ask to the different exploiters of the works. But so this has to work in the contractual relationship, but it seems that this is something that is quite difficult to implement, including because there are non-disclosure agreements. So this is one aspect. Another aspect of transparency is more general audience measurement of the performance of the works on the different services. As you know, from broadcasters and in cinemas, you know the box office, you know the performance of the different programs, because there are established measurement companies, but this does not exist yet on VOD services. So I think this is also something that would be interesting to discuss. Maybe this is something for as a follow-up of the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. This is something for the implementation of the Copyright Directive. But I think it's important that the issue is raised today, and that it's highlighted as a concern for authors and producers, I think.
Thank you, Cécile. So basically, we would need a sort of VOD box office to see how the works perform. That could be interesting, indeed. Miruna, I guess that you spoke quite at the beginning, so maybe you would like to give your view also in light of the discussion that has been taking place so far. If you want.
Thank you
Miruna?
very much, Maya. Thank you very much, Maya. And I'm sorry to have to be the boring one that goes back to the DMA proposal to say that that broadcasters very much support the actual intention of the European Commission on the DMA. And while we agree that there are certain imbalances in contractual negotiations, I think in all areas of life in general, we fear that the DMA should really capture what the Commission intends to capture. As for the transparency requirement, we are unfortunately not in possession of such data. We are under competition law scrutiny, so we can't really have access to such data ourselves. However, we find that the DSA package has a different purpose, and I think that if more fairness and contestability is brought on the market in general, everyone will gain in the end. So just to add that. Thanks.
And this goes, maybe there is also a comment here from the Q&A box. I feel that VOD market is a competition where it will only win when the market is more ponderous. I see necessary to create a common VOD market. What do you think about that? That can be food for thought for further reflections. I see also here now that it's getting very lively here, so I'm so sorry that we won't manage to address all of them. There is another comment from Fera, ensuring a level playing field between authors and producers on the Copyright Directive, Article 19, transparency obligations, as well as collectively negotiated standards for reporting would bring legal security to an entire value chain. There are many tools out there, so that's also a bit the idea. The DMA is what's new, so I think it's important to help understand what's in, what's out, what applies and what not, but then we should not lose sight of the regulatory tools that we have. And I'm sure that many of these issues that we have in the chat box today, we will analyze more in the next webinar, which is on copyright and the DSA. So I'm on purpose keeping it a bit out today. I don't know if there is any of the other panelists who want to make a last brief telegraphic remark. Otherwise, I move on to Oliver. Yes, I see
Alexandra.
Yes. Please, Alexandra, telegraphically.
Is the common path we are having, the common subject where we all agree in the need of more transparency. As regards business relation, as I mentioned, I would like to refer to Oliver's presentation and the fact that the DMA was aimed to tackle gatekeepers that have a dominant position, an obvious dominant position in the market. And since 2018, where the package was at the beginning of the thoughts at the European Commission, things have changed dramatically, but strongly due to the pandemic. And I can just mention Disney numbers of subscribers that has been the expectation that they had for 2024 has been reached in 2021. So we are in an acceleration process that changed the play also of the players and the market. And we have to take that into account. It's going super fast. Thank you.
Thank you also for being super fast in your remark, and I'm sure that this is not the last time we will discuss these issues, so there will be more to say. Now I would like to ask Oliver to give his impressions. We have talked about the VOD market from many angles after your impulse talk, so in a couple of minutes, I don't know where you would like to choose your impressions. I imagine you have many. Oliver.
Absolutely. There are many impressions from highly interesting contributions on the panel from the speakers, but also in the chat and the Q&A box. And also looking at the time passing, I will just focus on one thing. And talking about gatekeepers and talking about what creates gatekeepers, it is my opinion that the focus on multi-sided markets and the focus on intermediation services may be a bit misleading, especially when we think about emerging gatekeepers. And because in the end of the day, and often it is really just a business choice whether I organize my market in a way that I'm advertising financed or subscription financed, whether I invite everyone to put content on my service, or whether I have a more vertical structure. And what is, in my opinion, decisive for gatekeeper power to emerge is indeed the combination of vertical integration and the possibility to steer the audience. And this is, I think, where this both the data-based element, steering the audience through search and recommendation systems, through rankings, comes into play. Vertical integration creates the incentives to do so. And this is also, I think, very much related to transparency and the incentives to share performance data and to share audience data, or not to do so. And so, very last remark in regard to the regulation. I do not have the time to discuss the complex question whether the DSA and DMA are the right place, but the issue of economic dependence on vertical integrated and with the services with the ability to steer the audience, this issue is not covered by market dominance alone, and we need an instrument to address this. Not saying that the DMA, DSA is the ideal place for that, but these situations of dependence are something that needs to be addressed without reducing competitive forces and without reducing innovation, but in order to keep competition activity and competition intensity up, so that we do not have the next gatekeeper issue maybe in the VOD market in 10 years. So,
thank you for having addressed the issue of competition in VOD market, because indeed that's also the angle that has been highlighted in parallel with the issue of transparency. So thanks a lot for that. And now I would like to call Anna Herold on screen to see what kind of takeaways she will bring for the future work of the European Commission. Many things have been mentioned, the AVMSD many times, and you are the queen of the AVMSD. So I look forward to hear what are your main messages from today, Anna.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you to all the speakers for this very interesting exchange. Many things have been mentioned, so it's very challenging, to have takeaways from this session, but I'll try to do my best. So I think I will start by mentioning something which is which I think was mentioned by Anna when she repeated, this old maxim that we have in the audiovisual sector, that content is king. And I think that shows also that we are talking here about very different markets. So when we are doing these parallels, about the gatekeeper role, I think we should always keep the market perspective in mind and also look how different this market is. And just to give you an example, we have talked and focused a lot about, the soaring subscriptions to the services due to the pandemic. But I think it was only yesterday where it was announced that Netflix shares plunged by an impressive number of percentage points, because there are not enough new customers that are joining the platforms, and of course Netflix hopes to reverse this trend by releasing new seasons for certain very successful content, but it's to be seen. So I think that this we should keep in mind. We are talking really about very different markets here. Then on the problems that were mentioned, and how we can sort of put a bit of order now in this plethora of problems that were mentioned today, I will try very briefly. So I think it was clear, it was mentioned by Miruna and others. We should always remember we still have the old good competition law tools at our disposal. We should, although maybe not forget that it was the same competition law that prevented European services a la Netflix to emerge in the first place. We could be in a very different place today if some of the German, UK-based projects for joint distribution platforms for VOD were allowed by the national competition authorities. It's a very old topic, but nobody remembers about it, but I think we should keep it in mind. Then we have, of course, things that already exist, and this is important. I tried to already make it clear, but now having the problems, I think it's easier. So first, the issue of algorithm ranking, that was mentioned by all of the speakers. It's very important. And I really want to insist, we do have already in the AVMSD a very strong prominence obligation. Okay, we can take the criticism that it doesn't have a lot of detail as to how prominence of European content has to be ensured on VODs, but it is an important tool that, as you, Maya, said, has to be explored and is being explored by European regulators. And any concrete input in this regard is very welcome. Second issue, that Cecile, I think, very eloquently described, and I briefly referred to, the sort of American US based model of copyright relationships that fits very uneasily with our concept of authors' rights. So this work for hire model, all or nothing, in different words. So again, we have seen a lot of examples in the transposition, which is voluntary, but still it clearly is possible for member states to have these obligations on cross-border VODs in terms of let's say, investment or financial contribution to the production of works at the national level, that try to appease the negative effects of this model. We have seen this in Italy, we have seen this in France, we have seen this in Spain. So I think, there are already things happening in the transposition of the current rules that, directly can have impact on that. And finally, I come to this difficult issue of data access. I think that here it is clear that that what we lack is, I think you already said it, Maya, is a system for audience measurement for the VOD market. We have faced this difficulty in the process of writing the guidelines on how to calculate the share of European content on VODs, and I think that it is time that maybe we try to think all together what can be done in order to come up with a workable solution in this area. So I think that would be it from my side, and I can only say that while I clearly welcome that you have, most of you, and I see there were notable exceptions, agree with the choice of the DMA, that ultimately, I think, as someone already said, will also have a positive impact on the market, because it will increase contestability in the market, especially for players that have both services, the services that are covered, this was also raised in the chat, and those that are VODs overall. So there will be this, positive spillover effect in any case. But I think what is important is to remember that every problem has to have a response in the right tool, and that's probably the sort of short conclusion of this event, that we need to speak about problems, but we need to tailor the response, to the actual issue.
Thank you very much, Anna. And indeed, there are many tools there, many toolboxes, and sometimes we don't see them. So maybe some can be exploited more. And I think the work that can be done on the prominence part and Article 13 and the AVMSD might still have a long road of fruitful new practices to develop. So we will also see now how the implementation process will be completed. Not all member states have completed it yet. So maybe we'll see some good surprises there as well. And thank you for having wrapped up so well all the issues, and also reassured the fact that the Commission follows up and will continue working on them to try to find solutions that might help improve and make sure that the viewers get what they want and that the market functions well. So with this note, I will also like to bring everyone back on screen again, because you have all been extremely helpful in bringing lots of food for thought, which will help us also feed a publication. We will produce, as European Audiovisual Observatory, a report based on this series of webinars and conferences that we are doing on this topic. We are trying to look specifically at the interplay interplays between current rules and the new proposed rules to clarify a bit what applies to whom and when, which is not always clear. And the more you read, the more you discover new rules. So thanks to all of you for having helped us in this exercise. From Gilles Fontaine, European Audiovisual Observatory, Oliver Budzinski, Ilmenau University of Technology, Anna Herold, European Commission, Cécile Desprangre, Society of Audiovisual Authors, Miruna Rovano, Association of Commercial Television in Europe, Alexandra Lebre, European Producers Club, Mark Putman, Eurovod and Out TV Media Group, Anna Solar-Bassett, Vodafone, and also to our participants in the chat box and the Q&A box. There is plenty of stuff there, which I invite all of you to take a look at. We will now collect it and will also help us for the publication and for the next webinar on copyright and the DSA package. It will be in 5 weeks, Thursday, 27th of May, same time, 4 o'clock. So stay tuned. And in the meantime, stay safe and goodbye.